I've worked at a long-term residential addiction treatment center, doing overnight Monday through Friday, midnight to 8 a.m. for over 6 years. Since I'm the house supervisor, I'm alone, except for the 30 to 40 sleeping clients, at least until the day staff comes in at around 8 a.m. The building is a converted 3-story apartment building, 4 apartments to each floor. My office is an old apartment on the ground floor. The apartment right above me was also converted into offices and is locked by me every time I arrive at work. Up until 2 years ago, our place was pretty haphazard as far as our furniture and overall access to desk and other office supplies, as we were funded by the state, but manned by a private organization. This was great, as people were able to get long-term inpatient addiction treatment for free, but at the same time, as many know, being government-funded usually means that your budget is stretched extremely thin. So most of what we had were hand-me-downs, and the office I still work in today, which has since been remodeled. At the time of these events, it was basically your standard 1980s apartment, complete with carpet and a beat-up patio door. Except, add in some old hand-me-down desk and office equipment. Now I don't remember the exact date, but I had been working at the place for about a year, and my desk was located in what used to be the kitchen. So right above me hung an old chandelier-style ceiling light. I remember sitting there and putting administrative data in my slow computer at about 3:30 a.m. when I noticed a soft noise coming from the apartment above me. I ignored it at first, but then it became louder, sounding exactly like the slow pacing of someone walking back and forth on the floor above me. I stopped and listened, and over the course of about 5 minutes, the walking had slowly increased in intensity to the point that the chandelier light was actually shivering slightly. As I stated before, this second-floor apartment above is checked and locked by me every time I arrive on my shift. So the first thing that popped into my head was that someone had perhaps scaled the balcony outside and somehow came into the building. We've had clients do this before, so it wasn't exactly an out there idea. Being that I work alone, I went up there to check the apartment. I worked many years in corrections and law enforcement before I came to my current job. That being said, I'm pretty comfortable when stepping into an unknown situation. So anyways, I locked up my office and went up to the second floor. I checked the door to the office apartment where I heard the footsteps through the ceiling below, and the door was still locked. I stood there for a few minutes, in the event that if a client or whoever else was in there possibly heard me coming up the stairs and stopped moving around. But after about 5 minutes or so, I didn't hear anything. I unlocked the deadbolts on the door and shined my flashlight into the apartment office. All the lights were off, and I glanced over at the second-floor patio sliding door. It was shut, blinds pulled, as I'd done myself several hours before, and I could see on the handle that it was still locked. This office apartment had the same layout as mine below, so it was a simple look into the kitchen and front closet, then down the single hall to 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. All were empty, and all offices were locked. I opened and checked in them, just to be sure that the whole place was empty. It was. So I shrugged it off and went back down to my office to finish my work. These events would repeat themselves about 6 or more times over the course of about 2.5 weeks, and I just started to ignore it after about the 4th time, thinking that if it was a ghost or spirit or whatever, that as long as it didn't get more rambunctious and it wasn't bothering me, I didn't care. But one thing I did note is that it always started at about 3 a.m. and stopped right at about 4 a.m. It was little over a month after the first time that this happened that things began to get a little more interesting. It was a Friday, and around 3 a.m., I had just finished up and putting data on my computer when I heard one of the apartment deadbolts slide open from down the hall. I assumed one of the clients was going out for a smoke, which was a common enough occurrence. But I quickly heard feet padding down from the hallway. My office apartment was one of those swing Dutch doors where the top half of the door can be left open while the bottom is shut. Clients know that they have to ask permission to come into the office, but this young female client simply opened the door, ran in, and practically knocked me over in my chair, her eyes wide with fear, and saying frantically in a hushed voice, "There's someone in my room." This all happened so fast that I was quite startled and wasn't sure if I heard her right. I quickly stood up in my chair and asked her while looking into her terrified face, "What did you just say?" She grabbed a hold of my upper right arm, and I could feel her trembling, so I knew that she was indeed terrified, and she said in a hushed but frantic voice, "There's a man in my room." This was completely out of the ordinary. Each of the 3 floors is 4 apartments. The bottom floor, where my office was, had 3 apartments, which housed at most 5 female clients each at a time. The second and third floor each had 1 office apartment and 3 apartments for male clients only, holding a maximum of the same. Though our building was co-ed, all clients knew from day one that any fraternization, especially being in the opposite sex's apartment or room, was by itself grounds for immediate discharge. Hence why I always lock every apartment after my first head count when I walk into work at midnight. I told the girl to sit in my chair and calmed her. I asked her what had happened, and she stated a bit calmer, but very scared. "I don't know. I was sleeping and I felt someone push me hard on my shoulder into my bed. So hard, it kind of hurt and woke me up. When I opened my eyes, I saw this really big person, dressed in all black. I immediately freaked out and rolled out of bed and ran down here. My roommates are still in there." I run a tight ship, so the chances of it being a male client in her room were pretty unlikely, let alone I didn't hear anything in a completely quiet building, and I remembered hearing her deadbolt slide open before she ran into my office. So I immediately assumed that if it was anyone, they had come in through the balcony. I took up 2 flashlights, 1 large mag light, and a smaller LED. I handed the girl my cell phone and told her that everything would be fine, and that if it was a male client, that I would take care of this issue right this moment. I told her that if it was indeed an intruder, that she was to call 911 on my cell phone if she heard me holler. She said she understood, and I told her to wait in my office. I made my way down the short hall to her apartment. I had my mag light in my right hand, up and resting on my shoulder in a cocked and ready position, in the same way that I was trained to use my baton in the past. I held the LED with my left hand. I slowly pushed the door open to her apartment. Only the light above the stove was on, and I didn't hear anyone moving around. I kept the LED in my left hand shining in front of me, and I could see that her room at the end of the hall on the left was open. I figured I could get whoever was in there in the eyes with the LED if they came at me, and then sock them with the mag light. I slowly made my way down to her room, first looking into the kitchen, then the bathroom. I then passed down the hallway and peeked into the corner looking in. Beds, blankets, and the closet were all open. Even the girl who lived in this room wasn't small enough to hide within them, let alone a man. I looked under the bed. No one. I quickly made a search of the rest of the apartment, checking the cupboards and what have you, but I found nothing. When I walked up to the patio door to check it, it was locked, and no one was in the apartment. I exited the apartment and slowly closed the door, as I always do, so it doesn't bang and wake anyone up. I hadn't even taken 1 step when I heard the deadbolt on the door creak into its locked position. I could feel the hair stand up on the back of my neck and arms. No way someone could have gotten up to the door that fast and locked it without me hearing them. I don't have superhuman hearing, but this old building is creaky. There's just no way. I turned around and took out my keys, and the deadbolt was indeed locked. I snapped it open and quickly opened the door, but no one. I briefly looked through the apartment again, but as before, there was no one. I walked back down to the office and calmed down the young client and told her I had checked it top to bottom twice, and I didn't see anyone. I didn't tell her about the deadbolt locking on its own, nor bring up the fact that it could possibly be the same spirit that paces in the offices above. But basically, I talked her down by reasoning that the experience was probably just a bad nightmare. She was still scared enough that she didn't want to go back to her bed. So I just let her sleep on my couch in the apartment directly across from my office. Nothing more happened that night, but the interesting thing about this story is that this wasn't the first nor the last time this would happen. For almost a year after this, I kid you not, I would have close to 24 clients, the majority female, come down around the same time in the night, even men, and tell me that some shadowy figure grabbed them while sleeping, walked down the hallway in their apartment, or would be standing in their doorways while they slept. Whatever spirit this was, it wasn't malevolent, but it definitely had a bit of a sinister sense of humor. And I think me being honest with them about my own experience actually helped, as I did believe them. Over time, and nearing the end of this year of high supernatural activity, for the lack of a better term, my coworkers had begun to get a kick out of picking on me about it, calling it my ghost, and sending clients who would report stuff to them to talk to me about it. But one of my coworkers, who took a week's worth of my shifts when I had taken vacation that summer, greeted me on my return by telling me that he had also heard the pacing and had had a deadbolt close on its own as well. It felt nice to be vindicated. After about a year from the first pacing incident, it just kind of stopped. And over these past almost 5 years, I've experienced some pretty infrequent but interesting things happening of a different paranormal nature. In one incident, I heard a loud popping like boom outside and saw all my surveillance cameras suddenly flash red in the middle of the night. But when I looked outside, I saw nothing, and no one woke up wondering what that boom was. I've seen dark silhouettes standing in the entryway of our building on numerous occasions. They would stand there for a few moments, and then just disappear when the image on the screen renewed itself. I've had more things happen, but for the sake of how long this has gotten, I'll end it here. Let me start off by saying that I've never considered myself a superstitious person who believes in ghost stories. In fact, I'm the type of individual who desires evidence and facts over anything else. A see-to-believe kind of girl. I don't remember experiencing a paranormal event in my life. That is, until recently. Which, by the way, didn't take place all in one moment in one exact location. This fact creeps me out even more. Now, I live in a very safe upper-middle-class neighborhood in Maryland. I've never heard of any robberies, rapes, or murders happening in the specific area where I live, and I've certainly had no personal encounters. This is why I'm fairly convinced that what I saw was in the category of ghostly phenomena. This story begins one early morning on the first week of May 2016. I remember feeling restless because of my out-of-whack sleeping schedule. I tend to like staying up late and sleeping during the day. I've been getting a sufficient amount of sleep. It's just, my sleeping patterns have been flipped recently. Living on my own in Lancaster while attending college is partly to blame. But I was back home for the summer and was trying to fix that issue. So that's why, on this night, I was restless and agitated, tossing and turning in my bed while my parents and sister were sleeping peacefully through the night. It was still dark, and I looked at the time on my phone. It was around 5:30 a.m., and I was still wide awake. I decided the best thing to do is to walk around for a bit and read downstairs until I got drowsy. So I tiptoed downstairs and tried to be as stealthy as possible, as to not disturb my family in their slumber. However, every step I took was creaking and squeaky because our house was moderately old, but sturdy nonetheless. I make my way down to the first level and walk quietly through the main hallway to the back room. Half of this space is an open-style kitchen/dining area, and the other half is a living room. In the middle, dividing these two sections, are glass doors with trim leading to a small deck in the backyard. I turn on the lights nearest to the back doors and sit on one of the couches. I pick up a photo book my sister and I made and began flipping through each page one by one. After about a minute passes by, I hear something strange, a tapping noise. I look out my window to check if it's raining or drizzling outside, and it wasn't. I listen more intently to try and pinpoint where the noise was coming from, and I notice that it's close, uncomfortably close. In one concentrated area, in fact. It sounds like it's coming directly from the other side of the glass doors. There are door jambs on both sides, and the tapping noise appears to be coming from the vinyl sliding next to the door. Steady tapping persists, and I peek out to see if it's an animal, but I see nothing. As I get a closer look, the noise stops abruptly, and I can see everything in plain sight. There are no blind spots, and the light is on, so I'm confused as to what I just heard, but decide to shrug it off as me just being paranoid. I sit back down and open the book again, and a few seconds later, the noise starts up once again, but this time, it's not on the vinyl. It's on the glass door right beside me. This time my adrenaline kicks in, and the sound sends shivers down my spine. My eyes steer my head in the direction of the noise, turning around and facing the door as the tapping only grows louder and closer to me. I see nothing there. It makes no sense. At this point, I'm freaking out and bolt down the hall, up the stairs, and into my room, quickly shutting the door behind me as I quiver in fear. I get back into my bed and hesitantly peek out the window facing the backyard. My neighbor's backyard is directly across from us and is bordered by a fence from our backyard. They have their beam lights on. It's so bright that some of the light is shining onto our yard as well. My eyes were well adjusted to the darkness and could see if there was any suspicious activity going on. I was just hoping that this wasn't a person trying to break into our home. I peer around the yard and the neighbor's yard for a few minutes, and suddenly my eyes spot a movement around the fence. The light helps significantly where I notice this happening. I blink several times for clarity to try and comprehend what I'm seeing. There is definitely movement taking place. However, I cannot piece together who or what this exactly was. I don't see any movement of the leaves or the weight of footsteps on the ground. This thing appeared to be levitating, as if it weighed nothing at all. I thought I was completely losing my mind. I looked away and back, but I still saw this creature, and as I kept looking at it, I noticed that it slowly faded away. I'm not sleep deprived, and I know that I'm not hallucinating because I basically slept all of yesterday. I'm baffled and scared, but at the same time, fascinated. My heart was pounding. I close the curtains and hide like a child under the covers. My eyes are wide open, and the adrenaline was still pumping through my body. What had just happened? I contemplated for hours, until I finally drifted to sleep. I woke up at around 4 p.m., and I was honestly hesitant to tell my family about my experience. I told my sister, and she seemed intrigued but skeptical at the same time. I knew she would be. A couple of days pass, and my parents, sister, and I are heading to New York City for vacation. Since I told my sister of what had happened, I thought I should also inform my mother and father. I do, in minimal detail, and I receive a polite response, but could tell that they didn't believe me and thought I was just being paranoid. Around 10 p.m., we arrive in New Jersey and stay at a hotel for the night before commuting another hour the next morning into New York City. My sister and I share a room in the Comfort Suites Hotel, and by this point, I try to convince myself that my bizarre ghost-like encounter was a one-time thing, and that I should let it go and move on. I take some ZzzQuil, turn off the lights, and get under the covers and try to fall asleep. After a couple of minutes, I noticed myself dozing off, but not for long. I have anxiety and panic attacks every now and again, the kind where you feel like you're falling off a cliff and that life is escaping from your body. This night was different. I'm comfortable falling asleep until my eyes open wide as I gasp for air in a state of panic. As I opened them, I saw something towering over me next to my bed. It was a tall, dark, semi-transparent figure, very similar to what I saw in my backyard the other night. I flinch backwards in fear and blink a couple of times, and all of a sudden, it disappears before my very eyes. What was this thing trying to do? Torment me? Follow me? What's happening? Knowing that my sister was only a few feet away brought me comfort and a sense of security. I sighed heavily and eventually fell back asleep. I attempt to suppress the thoughts of these events, which all took place within a week's time frame. And I succeed. During my stay in New York, I distract myself and have a good time. My family and I head back home the following week, and the thought of whatever that thing was came back. Every night I went to bed, I would peek out my window to satisfy my curiosity. But so far, I've seen nothing since I've arrived home. This happened when I was around 12 years old. I lived in a very rural part of Michigan that was surrounded by woods, and the nearest neighbor was about 2 or 3 miles away. I was an only child, and I had a very long walk down the driveway by myself. I remember it was a time of year that was always dark in the mornings when I got up and started the descent down the mile-long driveway. I had just received a new MP3 player for my birthday, and it just loaded a whole bunch of Hannah Montana songs on it. Even though this detail is totally irrelevant, I just remembered it going along with that stage of my life for some reason. The morning this particular incident happened was just a normal day. I sleepily got showered and dressed for school, half-heartedly ate a bowl of cereal, and headed out into the crisp morning for the usual dreaded walk. Now, before this, nothing had ever really happened to me when I was walking to catch the bus, but I always felt scared, like something was going to run out of the woods and grab me. I'm happy that I got my MP3 player, because it helped me block out all of the noises around me that usually put me on edge. I always put my headphones in, stared down at my feet, and walked briskly to the end of the driveway. Today was no exception. I had been walking for a little while, and was just walking past a certain part of the woods when I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I plucked the headphones from my ears as I looked up and saw this shadowy figure watching me from the woods, seemingly trying to hide in between the trees. It was just a black, lumpy-looking silhouette with sad-looking yellowish eyes. I know what you're thinking. It could have been an animal, like a big cat or a possum or something. I made eye contact with it for several long seconds, waiting for it to come after me. However, I didn't feel scared or frightened. I felt oddly calm during the whole situation. That is, until I heard the screech of a bus stopping a little ways down the road. I looked, seeing that it was at the end of my driveway, and as soon as I broke concentration with this thing, I felt all the fear pour in, like I had to run. Like I had to get away. I began moving and felt it running after me, charging me. I dropped my bag and started running even faster, with still half a mile to get to before I reached the road. And hopefully, the bus beat me there, as I could hear its noisy approach. I ran harder and faster than I ever had before. I didn't dare look behind me because for some unexplained reason, I knew that if it caught me or if I stumbled, I'd be dead. Luckily, the bus stopped right before I ran out of the driveway. The bus driver stood up in alarm, looking at my sweaty face. He asked if I was okay with the trembling figure. I shook my head no. He then asked what was wrong. All I could do was whisper, "Didn't you see it?" He looked confused and crouched down next to me in the little space the front of the bus would allow. "See what?" he whispered. I pointed to the driveway in response. With this, he stood up and looked towards where my finger was pointing. "I don't see anything," he replied. I straightened my posture and fearfully glanced out the window shield of the bus. The only thing I could see was my purple backpack laying in the middle of the driveway. "Want to go get your bag?" the bus driver asked as I turned to him with huge eyes, and also looked to see everyone on the bus now staring at me. "No," I responded, and he sat back down, muttering something about having the school call my parents. As I took an empty seat somewhere in the middle of the bus, I stared down my driveway at my backpack still laying there as the bus pulled away. I'm now 20 years old. This day is so clear to me, and it still plays in my nightmares sometimes. I've told my friends about this. Well, some. I don't care to share this story with everyone. Some people may think I'm crazy. My friends told me it could have been a demon. Others said it could have been a disheveled spirit. And one even said something about a familiar. And I haven't had an episode like this, still to this day.